for the average person, the like whether or not AI has become sentient is like not a salient question. Like sort of going back to your like earlier point, like what's the point of thinking about the future? What things should I pay attention to? There are a million things to pay attention to. Frankly, like whether an AI has become sentient is very, very low on my list of things I would want people to pay attention to when it comes to the future versus like the AIs, the domain constrained AIs that are in your life right now. What are those doing? And who trained them? And like, what is the bias of the people who trained them? And are they making decisions that are actually the right decisions for me? And how are they coming to those conclusions? And that has nothing to do, I mean, not nothing. That is not sentient AI, but it's much more impactful on your life.
This is Meredith for Real, the Curious Introvert, and I'm Meredith. I explore the questions people think but don't ask out loud, either because they're taboo or thanks to cultural hypnosis. My mission, and yours if you choose to accept it, is to inspire curiosity by exploring the nuance and paradox of our world. Each episode is different, so bring your ADD and your earbuds and have a look around. Hey Curiositors, it's me, Meredith. Welcome to the future. It's that time of year where many Earthlings celebrate New Year's, except for the 7 countries that don't. Google that, it's super cool. For the rest of us, we reflect on the past year, set new goals for the year, or at least until Girl Scout cookie season, and generally look to the future. And that's why I thought it would be super fun to bring this week's guest on to have a discussion about the aspects of the future that live outside failed resolutions, like artificial intelligence, smart cities, and data privacy. My guest also brought up the question, is futurism just for white guys in black t-shirts on stages? Who gets to participate? What is consent? And why does any of this matter when you're just trying to make it to Friday? I feel like we did some forecasting of the future with smart questions and had a lot of fun doing it, as you will soon hear. And if you end up liking this episode, you'll also like the one I did with a molecular biologist about the GMO mosquitoes that were released in Florida in 2021. It's episode 118. And thank you so much for pressing play today. As we do think about the future, my hope is that it becomes a more curious one, where we all have the bandwidth to ask questions of each other and the world around us. Questions that we think of, not the algorithm. So thank you again for being a part of that. It's not easy to grow a show that literally defies the algorithm, but all of you make it possible. And if you're new here, welcome, welcome. Around here, we press play to get curious, disrupt the algorithm, and grow into better humans. We talk about everything from UFOs to the origin of curse words. So bring your ADD and your earbuds and have a look around. There's no specific order to listen to episodes. All right, enjoy the show. Smart speakers that remind you to take your meds. Refrigerators that order your groceries. Cars that drive you. As we advance our tech, scenes from Jurassic Park, the first one and the best one, by the way, play through our heads as we silently wonder, we could, but should we? My next guest has an undergraduate degree in ecology, behavior, and evolution from UC San Diego, and a graduate degree in journalism at NYU's Science, Health, and Environmental Reporting program. They're the creator of a podcast network that demystifies the future. Were recently featured on Netflix's The Future of Everything, and a writer who explores how humans tangle with science and tech. And today we're going to explore the future, specifically future tech, AI, smart cities, and digital ethics. Futurologist, curiously creative, the seriously not serious, Rose Eveleth. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. That was such an intro. Wow.
Well, thank you very much. I was reading your book, which I have to show it for those of the people that are watching this episode. I love it so much. I was reading it over the weekend, and my husband comes in and he looks over my shoulder. He goes, "Are you reading a comic book?" I think he got a little excited. And I said, no. I'm to explain the book, but I just love how each chapter opens with a comic, and it's just such a creative way to take a really abstract concept like the future and make it digestible. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It was so fun to work on. I'm mostly a writer and audio person. And so being able to work with a bunch of really incredible artists to create these visual worlds was like just beyond my wildest dreams. It was so fun.
Delightfully collaborative, I imagine.
Yeah, it was really fun. I learned a ton. I knew nothing about making comics going into this. And now I certainly could not make a comic of my own because I cannot draw at all, but I at least know the steps. I know how they all come together.
It's important to know those steps. Well, we're talking about the future today. And I think might be good to go ahead and lay the foundation of why we're talking about the future, because there's so many important things to talk about out there. You know, the economy, human trafficking, war, affordable healthcare. So I think we need to ask the question, is talking about the future really important?
Yes. And I mean, obviously I am biased given that it is what I do all the time.
True.
But I would argue yes. And I think that, I do think about the future a lot, and people often say like, look, as you say, there's like so many things happening right now. Like the future is just like fake. There's no point in sort of trying to dilly dally in la la land out there. Let's be grounded. Let's be real. Let's talk about real things we can do. And I think that the key thing that I always think about is that all the things you mentioned, right? War, the economy, affordable healthcare, all of those things relate to the future, right? We all have thoughts about what we would like for the future to look like. RE those topics, like perhaps no war, perhaps we would have affordable healthcare, right? Like the future of the economy. You are being pitched futures all the time by politicians, by advertisers, by everybody who is saying, hey, if you buy this thing, your life will look like this. Or if you vote for me, the world will look like this. And so the future is sort of inherently baked into all of the things and the choices that we make, whether we call it that or not. And there is, I think, a real advantage to actually framing our thinking around the future in a very specific way, such that we feel ready to make those choices, and that we're talking about our choices as if they are choices about the future, as opposed to just sort of choices about the present. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that it is quite literally better for our brains to be ready to think about the future. There's a really interesting concept in psychology called mental time travel, which sounds very cool and fancy, where you'd be traveling in time. It is literally just, can you imagine what you're going to do tomorrow, or what your day might look like next week? And that seems very simple, right? For most of us, we can probably do that, right? Like I'll probably wake up at this time. I'll probably go into my office and check my email. You can kind of imagine what that might look like. But there are many studies that show that practicing that is actually really good for our brains, and that for people who have depression or anxiety have a harder time imagining those things. And so if we can kind of practice and get ready, and sort of even in that small way of like, what does next week look like? What do I want next week to look like? That's a very small way of doing this mental time travel, and it can make us feel more prepared for the future. And the other reason I think it's really important for us to all kind of seize the means of future production and think about the future kind of in this way is that we are so often sort of told by people who are wealthy and powerful that like, no, don't worry, we'll take care of it. You have no power about to like make a difference in tomorrow. Like it's under control. We've got it. Like just do, live your lives, and you little like, plebeians, et cetera. And that's how you end up with decisions being made about you and your life and your technology and your neighborhood and your family that maybe you don't agree with. And so if we can all in small ways take back the reins of the future and sort of say, no, I actually have thoughts about what I want the future to look like, and I can make small steps towards those things now. It's, I think, a much more empowering way of thinking about the choices we make day to day than just sort of throwing our hands up and being like, I don't know, let, some rich tech person decide for me.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is that instead of that every day, the future is being talked at us. That's not good English grammar, but I think you understand what I'm saying. And so instead, it's empowering to carve out some time to mentally time travel, to think about the future and paint ourselves in it. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And then, when things do come across your decision-making plate, right? When you do have to make a decision about, do you want a camera security system in your home? You've already kind of thought through what those things mean and why it might, one choice or the other might align with your values better. And so you aren't having to do all of that thinking right in the moment of the decision-making point, which often you're like at the store and don't really have the time or energy to like do that because you also have to go pick up your kid or like go pick up the laundry or do a thing. And so if you've already kind of paid attention and thought through some of the implications of these technologies or policies or whatever future thing we're thinking about, it makes it so much easier in the moment to make a choice that you feel good about in the long run as well.
So it's like intention, really.
Yeah.
When I think about intention, though, I mean, I definitely think about yoga. And I think about yoga. This is like if you give a mouse a cookie. And when I think about yoga, I think about rich white ladies. I think about, privilege. And so is thinking about the future a luxury or is it a mental exercise? Because what you're describing is mental exercise, but I think a lot of people listening to this might feel like it's in the luxury category because they're just trying to make it to Friday.
Totally. And that's a really good question. And I think that it's both, right? There are many people who have a lot more time to just sort of sit and think and read articles and like, do all of that stuff. And I think that that's important. But I think also there is a very real counterpoint to that, which is that there's a great book that just came out by Ruha Benjamin, who's an incredible thinker and professor. It's called Viral Justice. She's a professor at Princeton University. And the book makes the argument that, yes, there are, for many people, it is a luxury to be able to spend time thinking about, these big picture, what you want the future to look like. At the same time, for a lot of marginalized communities, they are literally inventing the future for themselves every day in a very real way. And so it's both, right? I think that there are so many projects from activists and from people who are working to kind of make living conditions on the ground better day to day that I would consider futurism. I mean, I think that the people who are out there building, abolitionist projects, building projects that are mutual aid based to help people find housing, building all these things, building the world they want to live in actively day to day, which is often led by Black women, women of color, like people who don't necessarily have the privilege to be able to sit and watch TED Talks and think about things because they're doing the real work. Yeah. That is a type of futurism that I think it's worth including in this conversation. So it's not just that futurism is only the type delivered by said TED Talkers, white men in Black t-shirts on stages, right? Like we all have that moment. And so like there is a very real group of people who are inventing the future for themselves and their communities. I think of like the trans community of like building a future that includes us, right? Like, that is a part of futurism too.
Yes, because it's so easy to think of future as in Star Trek, as in like high tech. And I've never been an early adopter. I'm just not. That's just not been my thing. But I am deeply grateful for some tech like Google Maps because, dear Lord in heaven, if you are old enough to remember printing MapQuest and only having a little bit of ink in your printer, then you too will thank the Google gods for getting you to the place at the time that you're supposed to be there. What is it in your research and, all the discussions that you've had with interesting people around future that causes some people to jump all in and even exchange very private data for, the newest and the latest, and some people to be, fuddy-duddies like me?
I think there are a lot of things. I think that in general, on average, and I'm sure some people will say, well, not me. And okay, like in general, on average, the folks who tend to be more willing to, as you say, give up a lot of information for access to something that might be interesting and cool are the kinds of people who have a lot less to lose if that information were to fall into the wrong hands or be used in ways that could hurt them. So that's in general, on average, cis white men who have like power and privilege to say like, yeah, if my address gets out there, it's not that big of a deal. Whereas if you are, as we sort of in the members of the marginalized communities we talked about earlier, if you are a person whose address is actually a sensitive piece of information, you're maybe less likely to like jump in with both feet. I think also, I always really try and reframe the idea. I get told a lot, oh, you're so negative, you must hate technology. Because I'm often asking these questions of like, do we need that? Is that worth, the cost? Like, what are some of the ethical questions? And like if I hated technology, I wouldn't spend my entire life like working
right?
and thinking about
I'm having such a hard time of anyone calling you negative. Like, I mean, we haven't really met like in person, but I've properly cyberstalked you and you are not negative. You are very positive.
I do say, I feel like a lot of my work is sort of questioning whether a lot of these pieces of technology are worth it. And there are tech people who will be like, well, why are you such a naysayer? Why not like, let's just see what happens, And I think that's a very easy thing to say if you have, again, power and privilege. But I really want us to all reframe the idea of saying maybe no to certain technologies is actually a really like hopeful and lovely thing to say, like, actually, we don't need this piece of technology that is both invasive and also probably made of components that were mined by slave labor in, across the world to live good lives. Like we actually have what we need. We just need to reframe our priorities. And that's, to me, a very hopeful and lovely thing to say. And so I think that there are some studies that look at this, and it's relatively inconclusive because there's so many different types of people who may or may not be interested in technology. But there's some interesting work around people who have really strong interpersonal connections and really strong community actually tend to be less likely to want to spend a lot of their time trying to dive into the next gadget, because like the thing that technology, that excitement, that serotonin burst, that kind of like access to something new and interesting is sort of provided to them by their friends and family and hobbies of other kinds, right? So it's sort of a question. And, I think that I've been playing a lot around with, AI image generation techniques, right? Like I love to dive into these weird technologies. It's just worth, as you say, asking some questions about like, where are you taking my data and what are you doing with it? And like, what's the end goal here? And who owns this company and all of that?
Yeah, because this is an issue of consent. Because if you or you being like some company, automatically collects the data of everyone who utilizes, say, Wi-Fi, then what is that informed consent that do you know that you're giving up your data when you connect to said Wi-Fi? So that kind of begs the question, how important is digital privacy?
I think it's incredibly important. And this is not to say that you should never, ever, ever give up your information to any company for any reason, right? Like it's a trade-off, it's a negotiation. But I do think it's really important for us to ask questions about that, and also for companies to do a better job of explaining the answers, right? The language, I mean, you've all had this experience, right? You go to look at the terms and conditions, or you try to look at like the privacy settings, and you're just reading like complete gobbledygook, right? Like it is my job to be able to understand these documents. And half the time I'm like, I don't have any idea what you are saying. And that's on purpose, right? That is like lawyers wrote that so that it will be difficult for you and me to understand what it says. It is explicitly designed that way. And so I think that like, companies having more of a kind of like regular person language privacy policy is becoming more and more common, right? But just asking questions about what you think, where you think your data should go, and what you think, what kinds of privacy you want to be afforded, is something that we can all ask all the time when we make decisions about, like you say, what Wi-Fi to connect to, but also like signing up for any new service, right? As Twitter sort of implodes, right? Lots of people are signing up for lots of new social media sites and like giving their birthday to those social media sites or their, phone number, and like asking questions before you just click like, yes, that's fine, is something worth doing. And I think that this gets into a little bit of a conversation around like personal responsibility versus sort of like bigger picture cultural norms. I want to be clear that, like I said, often it is impossible for you and I to actually understand where your data is going and who owns it. And there's this sort of like nesting doll level of companies that are selling to another company and you have no idea. And it is like at some point you should try and ask those questions, but it is not possible for many of us to do that. And so it can not only be on us, the users, to like make these decisions. It also has to be on regulations and companies to do the right thing and all of the other pieces of this. But it is worth knowing even what questions to ask, I think, is like the first step, right? And often I think it's hard where you're like, what words should I be looking for in this? Like, third-party data? What are cookies? Like, I don't know, Like,
can I eat
complicated.
them? Yeah.
Right. Are they oatmeal raisin or are they right? So I think that that's worth doing. There are a couple of sites now that I think do a really good job of explaining this stuff. The Markup would be the one that I would specifically call out if you're interested in these questions of privacy. They have a great website, but they also just released, I think today, the day we are recording this, or maybe yesterday, they released a really cool tool that you can use to see where your data is being collected on various websites. So there's lots of places that you can go to kind of try and obfuscate some of your digital cookies that you're leaving all around in your digital privacy.
Digital cookie crumbs. Mm-hmm. I use DuckDuckGo. I did a digital privacy episode a while ago. It was like almost 2 years ago. And that was the big thing I got out of it is I deleted TikTok. And I'm like, ooh, this is a lot. And we don't have time to go into all that, but just know, dear listener, yes, 'tis a lot. Entertain yourself in other methods. And then, DuckDuckGo. The data collection thing came up in your book too when it came to smart cities, which I had never even heard of, knew nothing about until I read your book. So I would love for you to explain what a smart city is conceptually and then how it's being attempted anyway in real life.
Sure. So a smart city is really just looking at a city and then trying to find places where you can automate various processes within that city to become more efficient. The sort of positive version of the smart city is like, look, cities are complicated. They're like big engines. There's lots of things happening. And if we can find places where we can make it easier to make it more efficient or better for people, we should try to do that. So that can be everything from having little sensors underneath each parking spot on the street to know whether someone's parked there, to be able to provide a real-time map for someone who's driving to be like, hey, I want to go to this place. I want to find a parking spot. I can see where the parking spots are, right? That's one. That's a very like sort of front-facing citizen specific one. But there are all sorts of things in the back end of a city, like waste management, where the garbage is going, like making those routes more efficient, or, all the sort of like Wi-Fi across the city. Now, a lot of cities are trying to have these like mesh networks where you can just connect to Wi-Fi wherever you are. There's all kinds of ways. Basically, if you can think of a system in a city, there is a way to plug technology into it for better or for worse. Those ideas can be really great and they can be really useful. And there are places that can use them and make it like good for the people who are living in that city. The challenge is that sometimes those systems, those technology systems, are run not by the city themselves, but by these large tech companies who don't have the same kind of social contract with us.
That's the sweetest way of saying that. They don't have the same social contract.
Well, I mean, it's like, right. Like I think this is the big question of the smart city, which is that as a citizen of a city, as a resident of a city, you, by the nature of a democratic system, you've voted for your representatives, you have some say in how your city works, and the people who work for the civic government are beholden to you, right? They answer to you, the resident. In theory, right? We don't have to get into whether that's really what's happening in the United States right now, but let's just pretend like that's what's happening. That is, in a theory, the way that this works. When you have a problem in your city, you have an elected official to go to say like, hey, like you represent me. You're supposed to care about my interests and sort of represent my desires. A tech company does not represent or care about your desires. They don't answer to you. They answer to their shareholders, who you are probably not one of them. And if you are, you maybe have like one share of Google, right? Like they don't care about you. They care about money. They care about the bottom line in this very different way than a city does. And that creates sort of a different set of priorities. And what that means is that if a city decides to install facial recognition cameras all over the city for some sort of efficiency project to be able for quote unquote safety or for tracking citizens or for whatever it is they've decided they want to do, that data is going through the company and they get to decide what happens to it in a way that is inherently non-democratic, right? Is not something that you get a say in. And that's often what happens with these contracts. Often it's also a problem that your elected officials, not all of them are technology experts, which is fine, right? Like, but many of them, especially in smaller cities, are saying yes to things or, opting into projects that like they don't actually fully understand. And so when you ask them questions about privacy, they don't have the answers. Like they don't actually know where the data goes. And so that's another piece of this. But there are lots of cities that have implemented some number of smart city projects. New York City has a ton. Toronto was going to have a whole neighborhood called Sidewalk, or Run By Sidewalk, which is sort of a conglomerate and related to Alphabet, which is Google. So like, again, nesting dolls of various companies. And there were all these ideas around tracking and surveillance and putting cameras in and putting sensors in and all of this stuff that can be packaged to sound really cool and futuristic until you start asking questions about like where that data is going and what it means. And, what happens if someone is unfairly flagged for, something because facial recognition isn't particularly good at seeing faces of color. And, there's all these sort of knock-on effects to think about.
Hey, Curiositors, just a quick pause to show gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. If you ever wonder where I find guests for the show, the answer is it varies a lot. And since it's something that gets asked a lot, I started including the backstory of each episode in my Monday emails. And then on Saturday, I share cliff notes and clickable links in case what you heard was so good you wish you could have taken notes. If you want to be included, text REAL to 66866 if you're in the US, or go to meredithforreal.com if you're elsewhere. If insects are retreating into your home as the weather gets colder, but you feel sketched out by pesticides, I recommend Insect. I've used their service for years, and over, I'm impressed at their thoughtful approach to pest control. They even set out mosquito traps in my yard once to see what species was giving me so much trouble. That's where their certified mosquito identification specialist comes in handy. If you live in the Florida Panhandle or the Gulf Coast of Alabama, give them a call, ensec.net. If you watch the show on YouTube, then you see the beautiful backdrop of Trader John's, the exhibit where I record the show inside the Pensacola Museum of History. This is just one museum under the umbrella of the UWF Historic Trust. If you're planning a trip to Pensacola and need an indoor activity option, pick up a ticket. It's good for a whole week. Get your tickets in person so you can show the agent one of my emails and get $2 off an adult ticket. Now back to the show. Remember to stay till the end where I give you a sneak peek of next week's episode. Oh, so much to think about. And this is where I become passionately disinterested. Because I'm like, no, you guys, there's been like a jillion movies about this. This is literally the plot to every doomsday movie. And so I know you're so much better than I am in this department because you're like, well, let's talk about it. This is really interesting. And I'm like, no. And it's just how I get. But because here's why. And so I'd love to have your take on this because it's very well studied, as far as I understand, that there is a connection between our mental unwellness and our disconnection from nature. And so the evolutionary mismatch of the speed of our technology compared to our ancient brains and our less slowly evolving biology, it really causes problems. And it could be argued that it's the root of most of our bad behavior. And so when we're talking about, global internet all the time in every corner, nook and cranny of the world, and we're talking about these smart cities, I sometimes wonder if the answer isn't more tech, but less. What if it was like, instead of a light pollution ordinance, it was like a tech pollution ordinance, and you could go somewhere where there was no Wi-Fi and nothing was electronic, and it would be like a park or a green space, or, I just don't see a lot of intention around the idea of these technological advancements when it comes to our mental health and our physical health as well. Because there's people that have adverse effects from EMF. Some people are just really sensitive to it. So it's just like all of that is, under the rug, it seems.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot there. So I would say there are two things that come to mind for me. One is that I think that a lot of what you're talking about relates to the ways in which we've incentivized the development of technology, which is that more users, more people, more eyeball time, like more time that you are on your phone so you can see more advertisements, and then we make more money, right? Like that's how it works. And like that is not the only way to think about what success looks like if you are building a piece of technology. So, for example, I think a lot about that moment when Pokemon Go became really popular, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is, I think, a really great example because it shows both sides of this like incredibly complicated problem. On the one hand, it got a lot of people outside for like in a real way. And people were outside and we were like in the park and they were doing things. And there was this like kind of collective moment. I don't know if you played or if you just watched people play, but it was actually like kind of lovely. I'm not a gamer. I don't love like games. It's just like not part of my media consumption. But to watch people who've never met before being in a park and like having this moment where they like become friends because they're both like hunting the Snorlax that's in the park is like incredibly endearing, right? It's lovely.
I agree.
And it's getting people outside. There are apps like iNaturalist or Merlin, right? That are like made for helping you identify the birds that you're hearing and seeing, helping you identify the animals that you're seeing. So I don't think it's necessarily true that it is inherently like technology and nature and being outside are inherently at odds all the time. It's about our incentive structures. The opposite is also true in the sense that, going back to the Pokemon Go example, here's an app made by a company called Niantic, and their very explicitly stated goal is that they were using all of us, as those of us who were playing Pokemon Go. They really want to build an incredibly detailed millimeter by millimeter map of the world so that they can then put things onto it via AR technology, things like that. And so you were out there gathering data for this private company about what the world looks like so it can then create other products that it will sell.
I had no idea.
Yes. So this is like, it's a fun game that you are scanning your environment in this way that kind of is training Niantic data on what the world looks like to a very, very small, on a very small scale. So yeah, there we have it. Like, great. It gets people outside. There's a community building thing. People are doing stuff, people, whatever. And also you have the kind of like backdoor question of where is this data going? What is it being used for? And I think that that's kind of a great example of like, it doesn't have to be the case that our technologies are all inherent. There's always that like backdoor thing where we're secretly mapping the world, or like, it's actually for this, or like, surprise, like we're, like whatever. We could in fact make things that are just the first part, right? Just the part of like getting outside, connecting with people, understanding our local environment better, all of those things. But because of the way of capitalism, oh, here we go. We finally got into it. How many minutes are we in? And we finally got into capitalism.
Jazz hands for capitalism.
Here we go. Exactly. The incentive structures are such that it is pushing all of these app companies and all these people to design things in the way that doesn't actually encourage us to connect with one another and be out in our environment, be paying attention and be present in the world. And so I think this is like why I spend a lot of time. I spend my time thinking about technology is because like the potential is there, right? It's totally possible for this to actually be like really great. And yet, right? Like so it sort of feels like you can see examples of technologies that can actually help at all trails, right? Yeah. Getting people outside, right? There's lots of apps like that you could point to where like, if it was more like this, if we were really, Merlin is run by, I believe, or I can't remember if it's eBird or Merlin is run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, right? They're like, it's like a bird researcher group that has created this app. And so they're not beholden to the same exact kinds of capitalistic pressures around app development. And so I think that that's a thing I'd like to see is like more and more developers sort of trying to find ways to create apps where maybe the goal isn't just like maximum eyeball time, right? The goal is something else. But it's hard to do that when that's what pays the bills, right? And so I think that's where we start to ask questions around economic structures and incentives and what we actually want when we look at our technology, because it's totally possible for it to be doing that thing that we want. We just have to kind of like force the issue on the economic side.
Sticky. It's like, I always have food analogies. It's like a, plate of spaghetti that's been sitting out overnight with no sauce. You pick it up and it's just like a big old mess. That's how I feel about it. I think that is the food version of that. Well, let's talk about artificial intelligence, shall we?
Yeah, why not?
Why not? Okay, so in September of 2022, Google fired a software engineer who claimed that some of the robots that they had, the AI, was sentient. Back in 2017, Facebook had some bots, two bots, that created their own language and began talking to each other in a language that was unknown by their creators. And so, yeah, they nixed that. And there's some more recent examples as well, but it's stirred up a lot of conversation about what is sentient. So I would love for you to answer that question if you can. What do you think sentient is?
Ooh,
Right?
I don't have a great answer. Yeah, it is like, this is the question.
Mhm.
I think when it comes down to conscious AI, sentient AI, all of these questions. And there's so many, lots of philosophers have spent many, many years thinking about this. And there are tons of answers, right? Like there is one group that believes that the answer is the capacity to feel pleasure or pain. And that's what makes something sentient. There's the Turing test, which, you know, people have probably heard of, which is, can it trick a human into thinking it's another human? There's a sort of more technical definition that's something like, you know, could it tackle an array of tasks on its own like a human would, right? Without having to be told what to do. There's the sort of very relative, like a behavior that if a human were to perform it, we would call it intelligent, which is really interesting to me, because then it's like, okay, so like if a dog does something that if a human were to do, you know, and I'm obsessed with animals. Animals are in the book a lot, and a thing I think about all the time, because it sort of, there are a lot of these definitions that for a long time we didn't think animals could do. And I think at this point we're all pretty on board with the idea that animals are sentient, right? Which is not something that humans used to think. I should amend that. In like Western sort of like Enlightenment European-y kind of thinking, I think that's not true globally. But in sort of the like classic Western philosophy, it wasn't until relatively recently that we thought animals could feel pain, could feel pleasure, had like thoughts or inner lives of their own. There are still people today who believe that you cannot say that animals have personalities, which I think is a really interesting thing, and I vehemently disagree with.
Yeah, the squirrels in my front yard have personalities and different ones. And we know,
exactly.
Oh, that's that one. And that squirrel is da-da-da-da because it always da-da-da-da, but the other ones don't. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that like it's sort of one of the things that I find really interesting about these conversations is they sort of force us to ask the big question of like, what makes humans different? It does anything? Like, are we actually different, or are we just like another animal that has its own weird set of things that we do? Which is a question I'm fascinated by. And so this is, I think, the question of these sentient AI systems or claims is like, since nobody can agree on what that means, it's really hard to say if something is sentient, because we don't have a shared definition of what that means, even among living things, right? Even among like many of the things that we say for an AI, certain animals would not pass the test. And so like, does that mean something to us, right? Like if a krill, which is like an animal that is the base of the food chain, the most important animal in the world, in my opinion. I have a big krill tattoo.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
They're the best. They could not do some of the things that we are saying, you know, that we would want a sentient AI to do. So are we now saying that like krill are not sentient? Is that something we feel comfortable saying? You know, there's lots of, I think, sticky questions here. I think that it's also very easy. There are two kinds of people who like to think about sentient AI. There are people who get really into this philosophical question, who are like, this is like, they love that like sticky kind of like, what does it mean to be alive kind of stuff.
It's the spaghetti.
Yeah, exactly. Like double rainbow. You know?
Exactly.
That kind of world. And I love that. And then there are the very technical people who are like, it doesn't matter. All that matters is like, functionally, when we look at this thing, like, is it doing X, Y, or Z? And like, what does that mean sort of for our technical capabilities and all of that? And on that side, there are lots of ways you could say, sure, yeah, it's created its own language. That's sentience. But then the question is like, so what? And I think often we immediately go to sci-fi land of like, oh, well, that means it will take over and it will kill us all, right? That's like immediately the next step. And I think in general, that is not probably what's going to happen. It is very, very, very hard to build what sort of, this is not the same thing as sentience, but often what people in computer science or machine learning will call general AI. And a general AI is something that, so as opposed to a specific sort of domain AI, which means that like I can build an AI right now. I mean, I personally could not, but someone could build an AI right now that could look at a picture and say, that's a cat or that's a dog, right? And like do it 100% accurately pretty much all the time and all that good stuff. I can train these creative AIs on, pictures of me and then ask it to generate, what do I look like if I'm the hero of a Star Wars film? What do I look like if this, right? Like it can do that. That's very cool. That AI could not tell me what's the weather going to be tomorrow, even though that's like a pretty easy query, right? I could Google that, right? As a human. And so we have a lot of really, really powerful domain constrained AIs that can do really cool things within their little lane. They're like in their lane and they're like, I'm the best of the best at this thing. I can look at imaging from x-rays and I can tell you if there's cancer better than a human. I can do all these things. General AI is basically something that could do everything that a human could do, even if not as 100 like better than a human, but could like tell you what the weather is going to be like tomorrow and tell you if that's a cat or a dog and tell you if that's cancer and like do all of those things. That is extremely elusive. Depending on who you ask, probably not going to happen in our lifetime.
But
really,
humans aren't
really
even
hard.
like that. Like humans have specialties. So
Sure. Right. But I mean, in general, like, how you would, the humans are made to do lots and lots and lots of things. We can do a lot of things. We understand how to kind of like do tons of stuff. And most AI can do 10 things, 20 things. I mean, humans can do a million things. You know what I mean? There's just like, so like, we're not close to something even approaching a general AI. Even those conversational AIs, right? The two AI that had their own language. Great. They couldn't do anything else. All they could do is talk to each other,
be friends with each other.
Right. Which is great for them. I love that for them, lovely. But like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not the same. We're not talking about the same thing.
Right.
And so I think that's where I find I fall into the camp, and not everyone agrees with this, but my personal opinion is that it is totally possible for us to develop an AI that functionally acts as sentient as a human does. We're not close. We haven't gotten close to it. I think it is theoretically possible, but we're not anywhere near it. And I think that's where I sort of fall. There are people who believe it's never possible. That's just not a thing we can do. There are people who believe it's already here. I'm kind of in that middle camp. And I think that that's sort of like a fun thing to think about. But like for the average person, whether or not AI has become sentient is like not a salient question. Like sort of going back to your like earlier point, like what's the point of thinking about the future? What things should I pay attention to? There are a million things to pay attention to. Frankly, like whether an AI has become sentient is very, very low on my list of things I would want people to pay attention to when it comes to the future versus like the AIs, the domain constrained AIs that are in your life right now. What are those doing? And who trained them? And like, what is the bias of the people who trained them? And are they making decisions that are actually the right decisions for me? And how are they coming to those conclusions? And that has nothing to do, I mean, not nothing. That is not sentient AI, but it's much more impactful on your life.
And probably easier to research. Right.
Much easier to research.
Because
I mean, go for it. If you want to be double rainbow, like sentient AI guy, like I'm for it. Like, please, I love that stuff. But if you're like, I have 15 minutes, tell me like what to worry about.
Yeah.
It's not sentient AI.
Yeah, exactly. And I do like, that earlier you were mentioning, saying no is actually an okay thing. Because it's like, people default to yes when it comes to new tech because there's status a little bit, and, a smart speaker, like we don't have a single smart speaker. I will never have a smart house or a smart refrigerator. Like I'm just going to say no to those things.
Yeah.
And, so I appreciate people like you who are asking these questions because, more so you hear people talking at you about why you need these things. And even your friends, I have the latest iPhone, I'm like, dude, you just didn't you have a new phone like 8 months ago? Did you really need another new phone? And without thinking of the consequences of, okay, like you said, where did that tech come from? How is it collected? How is it sourced? And so, it's important to have futurologists like yourself. I love that word so much.
I think it's just dorky.
I know, but I like it because of the dork factor for sure. But I like it because I'm a question asker, and I think question asking is if it were an animal, it'd be endangered. Yeah. So I appreciate you so much. Can you tell people where they can keep in touch with you, your future projects? See what I did there? And in social media and stuff.
Sure. So it feels sort of like a weird thing to be like, find me on Twitter. Who can say right? Whether that will be a thing? But I'm basically the same username on almost every social media thing. So I'm pretty easy to find. And I'm just my name, Rose Eveleth, but with one E. So ROSEVELETH. I'm also the only Rose Eveleth on the planet Earth. So if you Google my name, it will come up for better or for worse. Like you're going to find it all. I am on Twitter. I am on the Instagram. I just started a Tumblr because I'm like, what do I do after Twitter? What's going to happen? And then I'm also on Mastodon, which who knows how long that will be for this world. But, I've been there since like 2018 and it's actually a fun, smaller community. Speaking of asking questions about your data, Mastodon is actually, I think, a cool model for a more sort of like user-owned collaborative social media site. Not for everybody, but can be very nice. But yes, and so you can get my book wherever books are sold. I also have a copy of it. And you can listen to Flash Forward, the podcast, wherever you are listening to this podcast here that you're listening to now. And what am I doing next year? So Flash Forward, my show has ended. And I am in the process of kind of figuring out what's next for me, man. And I think I'm going to sort of go into my little chrysalis phase and like cocoon a bit and see what's going to happen next. But we'll see.
Well, I'm excited to see what happens. Thank you for having this really fun and amazing chat with me today.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Thanks for listening. Did you think of someone you know while you listened? Help me grow the show by sharing this episode with that person. There's a share button right on your podcast app. And if you liked this episode, you'll also like the one I did with a molecular biologist about the GMO mosquitoes that were released in Florida in 2021. It's episode 118. Stay tuned next week when I talk with a medical doctor who lost over 150 pounds when he realized he couldn't in good faith give advice without taking it himself.